Welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, your host, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. Today we are taking a journey with Leonard Sweet. It is a journey that I have looked forward to because my Jewish background, my Jewish identity with the Messiah, and the statement that I make so often on this program that there was no New Testament at the time of Jesus is usually a startling revelation to people. They just never thought of it. They never really considered that there was no New Testament at the time of Jesus. So what was he thinking? Why was he thinking it? Why was he doing it? And it has to be examined from a first century Jewish context. And my guest today is Leonard Sweet. And I am just delighted to welcome Len. May I call you Len?
Yeah, please.
All right, Len Sweet to the program. He is an American theologian, a church historian, pastor, and author. He currently serves as the E. Stanley Jones Professor of Evangelism at Drew Theological School at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, and as a visiting distinguished professor at George Fox Evangelical Seminary in Portland, Oregon. He's an advocate of contextualizing Christianity into a digital culture. He is regularly voted one of the most influential Christian leaders in America. He is ordained in the United Methodist denomination. And today we're going to talk about a radical title of his latest work called The Bad Habits of Jesus, showing us the way to live right in a world gone wrong. Len Sweet, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Eric. Good to be here with you.
It's, first of all, the perspective that you bring, I have to be quite honest with you, is not shared across seminaries or across Christianity in general. You bring a view of Jesus in the context of first century life, his statements, what he did, and you put him in a kind of a through a lens that talk about the bad habits, but they're not bad habits. They are perceived as bad habits relative to the people that he was living among.
Bingo, exactly.
And so people who look at this title and they go, well, Jesus didn't have any bad habits. But this is a relative statement.
Right.
And in its relativity, it gives tremendous insight into the nature of the one great rabbi.
Thank you for reading the book. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. When did you come to that crossroad that you began to realize and accept the fact that there was no New Testament at the time of Jesus? John the Baptist wasn't a Baptist, and Jesus was walking and talking and preaching and teaching and exhibited a different behavior than the leadership around him. When did that first occur to you?
Well, my training is in history, and specifically church history. So I approach things as a historian, I haven't been trained as a biblical scholar, but I have been trained as a historian, and in many ways, I just started reading these texts as a historian would read them, and so I just, one thing led to another, and all of a sudden I realized, whoa, a lot of this stuff we're just projecting back onto Jesus. So I changed my language. I don't talk about the Old and New Testament. I talk about the First Testament and the Second Testament.
Okay.
There's an ongoing, Jesus didn't come to start a new religion. He was born a Jew and he died a Jew. This whole, so to understand Jesus, you almost have to be Jewish first. I mean, and this is what, to be a Christian, you almost have to be Jewish first. So this is the biggest revelation to me, is that we miss so much of who Jesus is because we don't understand Judaism. We don't understand Jewish context.
Thank you. I came to faith as a Jewish man, observant Jewish man at age 44, 21 years ago, and completely understood the New Testament in the context of my Jewish life, the words he said, as well as the Talmudic understanding of the expectation of the rabbis. Your very first chapter, and he spat. Jesus spits.
Yeah.
In the Hebrew, what he did was a word called bara. And bara means to create. Now, that is an attribute only of God. It is not an attribute of man. And
Right.
his statement that I only do what I saw my father do, and I only say what I heard my father say, is played out at the Pool of Siloam on that day with the blind man. Share with our audience, if you will, this.
Well, what I was arguing there, again, just following up what you just said, is that Jesus, in his spitting, is recreating the original creation
Yes.
that God did. I mean, when the first metaphor of the Bible is dirt. The Bible begins, I say, with a dissertation on dirt. We have nothing but, you look at, Genesis 2, we have nothing but dirt, but ground, but earth.
Right.
Then the second metaphor of the Bible is water. And so you mix the water with the dirt, and then you get mud. So our first introduction to God is, as God is creating, is God's playing in the mud. God's making mud pots. And so the mixture of that dirt and that water, or that spit, is what Jesus is doing here, that with recreating this man, not just healing him for one part of his body that's wrong, but he's recreating a new creature. He's recreating with this image what his father did initially.
It's spot on. The first two words of the Bible are Bereshit bara. In the beginning, God created. And that word create is only an attribute of God. Man cannot create. We can recreate, we can procreate, we can recreate, but we cannot create.
Bingo.
And you make that point. Now, contextually, the rabbis of that time, the Pharisees, had an expectation of who Moshiach or Messiah would be. And there were very specific things that you actually touch on in your book, and they actually parallel what message when John was in prison and sent a message, asked Jesus if he is the one, Yeshua, if he is the one or one will come after him. And he answered him in a very specific way, and you happen to illustrate in your book almost each one of those answers in Jesus' behavior. He said the blind see, the dead are raised, the lame are healed, the people delivered, leprosy, the forgiveness of sin, all these things in a very meticulous response, because these were each one of the expectations of the Pharisees. And Jesus was taught as a Pharisee. You and I are Pharisees.
Yeah.
We are the Pharisee training. We believe in the entirety of the Bible, both the law and the prophets. We believe in resurrection. So therefore, we are of the Pharisaical line of thinking, as opposed to the Sadducees that only believed in the law and nothing of the prophets of the resurrection.
Do you think Jesus, Eric, was trained as a where do you think he spent his missing years, his 18 years? Do you think he spent them in Nazareth, or do you think he spent them being trained in Jerusalem?
Well, there was a back and forth, as there was because of the Shalosh Regalim, the three required feast days. So he would be in Jerusalem on a regular basis for all of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He would return for Shavuot, or what's called Pentecost, which is an 8-day. So now you have 8 days, and then he would return for the 8 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. So there was at least a month that he would be making pilgrimage. Okay? We know that he was recognized as his father's son and was trained as a carpenter, but there was no carpentry at that time. There was stone. Everything was out of stone. So we tend to look at the English or the Greek for carpenter, but we have to look at the natural environment of Israel to know that this was not woodworking. Wood rots in that environment, so that we have to examine that. But
here's my problem, all right? You were known as a rabbi by the quality of your students.
Correct.
I mean, it wasn't how many books did you write, how many speeches did you give. Your esteem as a rabbi was who has the best student.
Correct.
Now, it was difficult because the rabbi couldn't choose the students. The students chose rabbi, although Jesus flipped that. But But here's my problem. We don't know anything after Jesus has this appearance where all of the rabbis say, we've never heard anybody.
Correct.
Now he's 12. All right? Nazareth is a pit. Some call it the armpit. It's a little dump, no bigger than 60 acres, just a little tiny place. That the only thing we know about it was known for its bad people, and it was a bad look, bad everything in every way.
Right.
And these are all basically Mary's relatives.
Right.
Do you think the greatest student ever that anybody's ever seen would have been allowed to languish for 18 years in Nazareth, or would they have arranged, as rabbis did then, to have picked him to study in Jerusalem?
You know, you pose a very interesting question, and hypothetically, you would think yes, but when we know that when Elizabeth was bearing John, and she recognized in her womb, John recognized Jesus in Mary's womb, that it had already been ordained and established that he was the Messiah. So we know that in the womb it was revealed. It was not revealed to the world until he came up out of the water, when God made the pronouncement that this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. That was the official, right. That was the breaking of the water, the birth, if you will, of his formal ministry. Did he have prior knowledge? I believe so. I believe it was supernatural. I also believe that at 12, when he read from the scroll of Isaiah and said, in the reading of this prophecy is fulfilled, that he was giving a very bold statement in the pattern of the bad habits of Jesus. He had already developed his character. He had already revealing now his true nature. But because of their perspective and narrow-mindedness, they couldn't embrace it, but they were marveling at his proficiency. There is no greater Rebbe than Jesus. Therefore, he could not have sat at the feet of a Nicodemus or at the feet of a greater rabbi. And of course, we read that it's well enough that the student be good as good as a teacher, not better. He was the ultimate. Therefore, I believe in my heart, can't prove it biblically, but knowing how many years I studied and trained sitting at the feet of a rabbi. And in the world I grew up in, rabbis did choose. You couldn't choose who you sat at the feet of. The rabbis chose you. Today in Israel, it's the same way.
Yeah, but in Jesus' day, I mean, that was the big thing, because you did not choose me, I chose you, right, he says to his disciples. And this is, at any rate, this is just for me, I mean, I'm working on a book on this, on the missing years. And I want to argue the case. I'm still not doing it publicly yet, but I want to argue the case that Jesus spent those years in Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem?
I mean, we don't know.
We don't know.
But he spent those years being trained as a Pharisee.
Yes. And
this is why he has this, he loves the Pharisees. That's why they're so conflicted, because he was one of them, and they saw him as the fair-haired boy that was going to lead them into the future. And instead, when it comes time, which you can't do until you're 30, to choose disciples, he turns his back on the temple establishment and goes to the highways and the byways and picks out fishermen and tax collectors and breaks that whole tradition there. So I just well,
clearly
it's interesting.
Right. Clearly he has a knowledge of their behavior, as he accuses them of you wash the outside of the cup, but the inside of the cup is what's dirty.
Exactly.
He was confronted by them when he was casting out a demon, and he sentenced them to death, that they had blasphemed the Holy Spirit. Well, that's a Greek term. We have to go back to the book of Exodus. We have to look at the 10 Commandments. What commandment did they break? They broke the third commandment. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, or you shall not be found guiltless. So he condemned them a year and a half before his crucifixion And that's when they began to plot his demise. But he knew them so well. He couldn't have known them in just a year and a half. There's 3 years. We're a year and a half into it, a year and a half left to go, and he confronts them and he condemns them because he has full knowledge of their operating behavior. He has full knowledge of how they pray and lord over people.
Yeah.
He was.
But again, it's all radical. This Jewish background stuff that we don't know it. How can we know our own faith, and how can we know? I went with my students. One of the things I love to do is to talk about the menorah. Well, nobody's ever talked to them about the menorah.
Right.
They have no idea what the menorah is. And then I talk to them about, so I approach it a little differently because I don't want them to know where I'm going, but I start with the mandorla, And, talk to me about the almond. Is the almond in the Bible? No, the almond's not anywhere in the Bible. So we have to, the whole menorah is an almond tree.
Right.
It's just a visual representation of an almond, bud, blossom, flower, all three, which is hugely significant.
And the almond shape is the eye. So there is a traditional connection between the shape being the eye. It is in the exact formation of our eyes, and especially the eyes of the 3 continents that were mentioned in the Bible, which there's only 3, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So it would have been more similar to the shape of the eye than even our own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, so how, and then Aaron's rod, and what's in the Ark of the Covenant?
Right.
Oh, I don't know. What is in the Ark? It's just, how can you, this is so exciting when you start reading the scriptures, and let them read you, but read you as out of their Jewish heritage is just unbelievable. So it was a whole revelation to me, and I became a whole new person just doing it this way.
Well, it's exciting. If I take a group to Israel every year, and I take them on a journey through Israel through Jewish eyes, and we go back in time, even to a place called Eretz Bereshit, which is called Genesis land, as we sit and we look out over the range to Mount Nebo at the place where Moses could see the promised land. We're sitting in a place that has line of sight to Mount Nebo. And we're looking out and we're beginning to embrace this vision that God had given him, that he could see it, but he couldn't enter the promised land. But yet I seem to remember he did enter the promised land, didn't he?
Yeah.
Where's the Mount of Transfiguration?
Yeah.
It's Mount Tabor. It's in Israel. So I guess Moses made it after all. And when we begin to look at the context of scriptures in the way of understanding these...
Well, and that's reading the Bible as one story, and that's what I'm big into.
Absolutely.
How do you see it as... we have so sliced and diced it into these chapters and verses, and John Calvin's the first one to have done that, on a massive scale with his Geneva Bible. But we don't access the Bible as one narrative. We just have all these little chunks, and so we've turned those chunks into principles, and so we lost the whole story. So I call the Bible the greatest story never told.
It's exactly
we don't know it as. Yeah, we don't know the story.
It's like
one of my tests is, can you tell the whole story in 10 minutes? And there's as many images as are there in the Bible, there's that many ways to tell the story, and you can tell 10 minutes.
Absolutely. I just before you came on, I did a commentary on the binding of Isaac and the crucifixion of Jesus, and they're actually an identical story. And when you look at it in all the parallels and all the similarities, as we examine it, there's 11 or 12 very specific, identical things that happen in both those stories. And the reference and the language of it, the only son you love, both were miracle births, and you go on and on through the list. And when you look in the context that for the Jewish heart, I would have had to have been prepared by God to know that there was a prior story of a father sacrificing his son and bringing about redemption, to understand this redemptive story of Messiah. I couldn't in my Jewish mind ever accept the fact that a father would sacrifice his son in my lineage, because that's not the people we are, set apart. we would have never embraced the pagan ritual of sacrificing a human. So you have to. God uses us to prepare and break the yoke of my Talmudic thought and my Jewish upbringing to expand the horizon, and that's what you do in here. And I think you do it in a particular way, and I find it very deliberate. In the year 2000, Time magazine came out with their top 10 things to expect in the new millennium. Number 10 was restoring the Jewishness of Jesus.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So as you are going down this, I'm seeing that first of all, I'm encouraged because when you take Judaism, there's 14 million of us. When you take Messianic Judaism, and then you take Messianic rabbis who are trained, who are of Jewish birth, raised, completely immersed in Judaism, not raised in the church. I don't know church stuff. I don't know church history. Calvin to me is a pair of jeans. It's that
okay.
That's the reference point. But I think you break almost in the pattern of Jesus, as you boldly present him as I was in the 60s and 70s, as rebellious, challenging, and questioning the authority. Our questioning of the authority back then was not from strength, it was from a position of really lack of understanding of what was going on, and we responded to it. We were doing the right things in the wrong way. But Jesus does the right things, and you present it as it appears to be the wrong way, but it actually is the way of God. It is the way and the pattern that we are to be. We are to be bold in our witness. We are to be set apart. We are to stand up to lies, to false gospel, to teaching which is not of the Lord, which is exactly what you portray him as in this.
Well, one of the things that motivated me to write the book, Eric, was that I was so tired of this phrase, I don't want to be known as a, quote, good Christian, and that whole good Christian language. My favorite T-shirt for a while was "Jesus, save me from some of your followers." A good Christian, that word "good Christian," meant what you were getting. You were getting somebody that was hypocritical and judgmental and so unlike Jesus. And we also live in a culture where we flip words. Like ridiculous doesn't mean ridiculous anymore. It means good. Random doesn't mean negative. It means positive. So I thought I'd have a little, and I started looking at these things that Jesus did. I go, well, in the culture of his day, what these things that he did were really seen as negatives, not as positives.
Right.
And he was trying to go against that culture, cut against the grain. And if you cut against the grain, you will get splinters. And I think that's one of our problems is we're not splintery enough. We've not gotten enough splinters and cutting against the grain of the culture. And so I want to incarnate the gospel in the culture. You said be in it, but don't be of it. And that's the problem is that either we don't want to get in it and we stay out of it. That was his third thing. Be in it, don't be of it, but don't be out of it either. And I want to be in this culture, but I want to not be of it. So I'm hoping these bad habits, which I try to practice daily in some way or another, I'd say practice the bad habits daily, will help people to show them how to be in the culture, but not of it.
Right. I'm actually very fond of the disappearing. I'll be in a room with a group of people, and I will find a way to just magically, and the people call me and say, "Weren't you just here?" I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
What made you think that I was just there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what he did, and you do this. So you actually write about that he procrastinated, he disappeared, he was wasteful, he was in the company of women, which was so Pharisaically and rabbinically incorrect. that a single man should be chaperoned and supervised in a completely separate, the Mechitza, the dividing wall between men and women. And we read what Paul writes, which is, now there is no Greek or Jew, male or female, and people just take that completely out of context. But they have to understand the view that Jesus had when he was reading of the scroll. He looked out and he saw men separated from women, and he saw Jews separated from Gentiles. The Gentiles were in the court of the Gentiles outside the temple. So when we look at this, the middle wall of partition, the dividing wall, has been removed, where now men and women, Greeks and Jews, Acts chapter 2, they had everything in common. Now we've opened up the door to the nations to come in. And Paul says in Romans 11 to provoke Israel to envy. But the world has been provoking Israel for 2,000 years, but not to envy. This.
That's one of the reasons I think Jesus. I mean, if you look at why he throws his temple tantrum, and we say, well, he didn't want the currency exchanged and animal rights and stuff like that. No, let's listen to him. As he's turning over the temples and releasing the animals, so he's turning it away from the stockyard and this banking establishment. He's saying, my house is a house of prayer for all people.
Right.
What is that? Well, what it means is that outer courtyard is the only place where Gentiles could pray.
Correct.
And this whole system had co-opted the fact that Gentiles no longer had a place to pray during Passover.
Correct.
And he that's what his house was a house of prayer for all
people. That's exactly right.
And
we're talking to Len Sweet about his new book, The Bad Habits of Jesus, showing us the way to live right in a world gone wrong. It is a radical approach. It is a perspective that some might find to be irreverent, but actually Jesus was irreverent. He was like his Father. He was no respecter of persons, and therefore his response was the godly response. His response was not to be pleasing to man, but to be pleasing to his Father. He and the Father were one. If you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. And he was trying to represent that there is no distinction between God the Father and the incarnate Jesus, that the same loving heart that Jesus portrayed, that embracing of children, the counter-culture approach that he took, was exactly why God sent him to earth, so that we could actually see the true nature of the Father. I would encourage you to read this. You will have a sense that you realize that you didn't know a lot of things about the life and times of the Messiah, and it will stir you to a hunger to want to know more. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to continue in our conversation with Len Sweet about the bad habits of Jesus. Go to our website, click on Books and Media, order this while we're on break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Revealing the Truth. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're in a deep conversation with Len Sweet, who is on this journey to really strip away a lot of preconceived notions from what we think or thought about Jesus and put him in the context and the life and times of his Jewish life in a Jewish world. He's written a book called The Bad Habits of Jesus, showing us the way to live right in a world gone wrong. Welcome back, Len Sweet.
Thank you.
This is so much fun for me as we journey down this path of going back 2,000 years. It's so interesting to me that the Jewish people had 2,000 years before Jesus to develop identity, and we've maintained that identity for now 4,000 years. And Christianity in its 2,000-year period has this 38,000 fractured denomination identity that it doesn't seem to be enough that Jesus is the glue to keep us all together in unity, when God clearly says, behold how good it is, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. If we truly embrace the character of Jesus, what will we be like if we really began to emulate these habits?
Yeah. Well, character has to find expression in context. And that's, to me, you bring together character and context, and you can't separate the two. So I love that phrase, be there. Be is the character word. There is the context word. What does it mean for us to incarnate the gospel, to be there, to be the character of Christ in the context of this culture? And I also am kind of really kind of adamant here that that we use the language of Jesus, that we talk about Jesus, that we don't just talk about spirit or God, that God is Father, and but God is Spirit. Jesus is God with us. So I am. I was asked to speak at a certain seminary, and students asked me to come, and the faculty got together and said, "Do we have to have sweet? If you get sweet, all you get is Jesus." and it was the highest compliment I think you could pay me. Okay, if you get sweet, all you get is Jesus. Yeah, that's what he says. If I be lifted up, I will draw. And we don't trust him to do what he says he's going to do. So
right.
we try and sit at drawing boards, drawing up this blueprint, drawing up this new 5 programs, or no. He's the draw. So that's what I want to do, is I want to lift up Christ, but in the character of who he is, because I believe, Eric, that this is for me the resurrection, that he lives his resurrection life in and through you and me. That Christian literally means little Christ. We are little Christ. And I want him to have a resurrection power and force in the world today by living in and through me. So that's why I don't talk about the language of imitation. Mm-hmm. I don't want to imitate Jesus. I want to impart him through the implantation of the Holy Spirit. I don't want to mimic Jesus. I want to manifest him. I don't want to impersonate him. I want to personate him in all that I do. And so that's for me the essence of what does it mean to show the character of Christ, is that he is so, Paul said, it's not I who live, but Christ lives in me. So we are, through the resurrection, he is being enabled to live his resurrection life in and through us.
It makes great sense, and you certainly illustrate that as you lay out aspects of his character, so we get a 360-degree view of him. But we also understand that he came to fulfill a promise of God, that God would, he called us to be Yehudim, Yehudi, which is the root word of Jew. It's not Judah, but Yehudi, which is worshiper of God. We were created to worship, be in fellowship with God, be in the presence of God at all times, the same way he patterned it that 40 years in the desert he was present with us. So it's a presence within us, that there's less of us, more of him, reflected in the words of Jesus, the patterns of him, that we would have the kind of faith and strength of the Abrahams, the faith and strength of Jesus to stand up against established rules, to bring clarity to emet, or truth, the real truth. And when he says and he declares that he is, in the Hebrew, Haderek, Haemet, and L'chaim, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We know that God said that when in Deuteronomy 6, verses 5 through 9, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, and with all your might, and you shall talk about him when you walk along the way, Haderek, the way. So Jesus is saying that this is the way my Father told you about. I'm using those words very specifically in context of you understanding that you have been obedient to the Mosaic law, which instructs you to walk along the way, and I am that way. And I'm presenting it to you in the vernacular, in the idiomatic language of the time, that illustrates that, yes, it is a provocative statement. I am God. I am with you. I am the way. I bring
Yeah.
life. And he demonstrates it through all these attributes. And these are attributes, not bad habits, but these are attributes that would be considered to be contrary to the norm, that would make him radical. And isn't that what he wants for us, to be radically saved?
Yeah, yeah, and radical means basically just to the roots. So we're getting right to the roots of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. I think one of the biggest things that boomers, my generation and yours, what we did wrong for the church was for the last 30 years, we've imposed this leadership fetish, on the church. We go to leadership conferences. You ever been to a followership conference? But that's what it means to be a disciple. Right. It means to be a follower, a Jesus follower. Not he's the leader, I'm the follower, so the identity issue is huge. You mentioned that earlier. For me, my identity. We've tried to make our identity, the identity of a Christian is to be a leader, and this is what you hear in churches all the time. No, my identity is as a follower. Leadership is a function. But identity is I am a follower of Jesus. And unless we have that identity, and we are in a crisis, the church is in a crisis because, God's church will always prevail and God will not be without a witness. And God's doing some amazing things in some amazing places around the world. But Christianity is dying in the West for precisely this reason, is that we've lost our identity as, which is formed in Judaism, where? Around the table.
Right.
Around the table. The most holy place is not in the synagogue. It's telling the story around the table with the whole family present. So we've, and this is what Jesus did. This is what he showed us to do. He had a whole table ministry. The table was the centerpiece of, we think of him speaking at lecterns. No, he talked around tables.
Right. As was the pattern of the tabernacle.
As was the pattern of
right, exactly. Where God was in the center. It was in a rectangular shape, the 12 surrounding, with God in the midst of them. And God did that for 40 years to show us the pattern of what was going to come. And he lays it out for us very carefully in the 23rd Psalm, that Jesus fits every single line of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. He said, I am the good shepherd. He goes line by line, declaring that this is who David was talking about. So if you don't have a grasp of the foundation, you're exactly right.
One of the things that I like to challenge my students with is I go, okay, I want you to close your eyes right now, and can you image Jesus praying? Of course they all can. I was like, can you image Jesus healing? Of course they all can, because there's a lot of Christian art that they've seen. Can you image Jesus preaching? Oh, of course they all can. Can you image Jesus eating? Yeah. Can you image Jesus singing? And suddenly they stop, And one of the things that we do most, as if Jesus never sang, he's a Jew. He would have sung all the time. In fact, you only sing the Psalms. You got a hymn book right there.
Correct.
And, we know he sang because that's the last thing he did with his disciples before he went to Gethsemane. And after the meal was over, they sung a hymn. And we even know what hymns, what Psalms they sang, the Hallel hymn songs.
The Psalms of Ascent. That's exactly right. Psalms of Praise. That's exactly
the greatest song ever sung in the history of the world, we've turned into the 7 last words of the cross. How I hate that, Eric. Because there were no 7 last words of the cross. There were 3 stories. 3 of the greatest stories ever told. The story of the 2 thieves on either. It's not just 1 cross. It's 3 crosses. The story of Jesus having to reconcile his birth family and his new family and make them one family. John, behold your mother. Mother, behold your son. And then the third, all the rest of them are, you said Jesus had this God-forsaken moment on the cross. No, he didn't. He sang Psalm 22. And you got Psalm 22 is the Good Friday Psalm. Psalm 23 is the Holy Saturday, the shadow of the death. And then, so you got a mountain, a valley, and then Psalm 24, Easter Sunday. I mean, how can you even understand those 3 days without understanding the Psalm 22, 23, and 24 background to each one? So it is all so connected, and to get people to connect the dots, we've been trained to take apart, rip it apart, exegesis that takes apart. What does it mean for us to trust the story, to trust the whole story, to trust it, and to connect the dots to the whole story?
I completely agree with you. You know, the statement in the Bible that God is the first and the last, the beginning and the end, you have to ask yourself from a Jewish mindset, you have to put 2 more words behind that. Of what? Because first and last is ordinal. That means there has to be something in between, and there's not. So he was the first and last of what? He was the beginning and the end of what? And actually, the last 3 words that I would consider that Jesus spoke would be the last 3 words of the Old Testament, which is, it is finished.
Yeah.
When you look contextually, the Old Testament ends, the First Testament ends at those 3 words. Those are the last 3 words of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
It is finished.
What are the words spoken to bring Passover to the end and the Paschal Lamb is slain?
Right, exactly. The same words. It is finished.
It is finished.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, how can you? So you, and this is all. It's like, you know, we read the Bible flat if you don't understand the Jewish background, because the Jewish background makes it 3-dimensional and 4-dimensional, and suddenly it all starts popping out and moving. We're just such flat readers. It's just really
even the Palm Sunday walk. This is I wouldn't refer to it as the Palm Sunday walk, but that's the reference point of the Palm Sunday walk. Is he journeys down the Mount of Olives and comes through the Golden Gate, the Eastern Gate, while 256,000 lambs are coming through the Sheep Gate. So why did he enter through the Eastern Gate? Because Ezekiel 44 had to be fulfilled. Because the king has dined within the walls. He came through that gate. Now that gate will be forever closed, and of course it's forever closed now. But when he left through the Sheep Gate. And when you examine what happened to him during those 4 days, the Jews laid their hands on him, the Romans laid their hands on him, and treated him just like the Levitical sacrifice on the Day of Atonement, where they took the sin of the people and they laid their hands on him and transferred it to the offering. And now he went from the clean and blemish-free, without spot or blemish, Lamb of God, to now bearing the sin of the world, and he had to be removed from Jerusalem, from the walls. He could not be in the city because he was now bearing our sin, and that's why he was taken out to be crucified outside the city walls, because he would now represent the offal, the part of the sacrifice that had to be taken outside of the city. Well, if you don't know the Levitical system, you don't understand why they both had to lay their hands on him. If Rome had only laid their hands on him, he'd be the sacrifice and the Messiah of the nations. If Israel had only laid their hands on him, he would have only been the Messiah for Israel. But they both had to lay their hands on him in order to transfer the sin of the world upon his back. And if you don't know the order of the sacrifice, the preparation of the sacrifice, what happened to him for those 4 days, it's foretold in Exodus chapter 12. The entirety of those 4 days is laid out. The inspection, the examination, then the take it whole and place it on a wooden stake and consume it until it's all gone. The same way communion was instituted at the Last Supper as the representation of Exodus chapter 12, where communion really was, because that's where you took the Lamb of God, the Pesach, the Passover lamb, and you ate it till it was all gone. Nobody takes a big chunk of a communion and throws it to the ground. You take one small piece and you eat it till it's all gone. It was instituted right there. But if you don't have that context, then you wonder how a Jewish man, could tell 12 Jewish men, drink, this is my blood. Eat, this is my body. If it wasn't in the context of Passover, if it wasn't in the context of saying that,
absolutely.
Right, I'm not just the Lamb of God, I'm that Lamb. I'm that Lamb that redeemed you on Mount Moriah. I'm that Lamb that redeemed you in the Exodus. I'm now that Lamb that John told you about, Yochanan, to take away the sin of the world. I'm that Lamb. I am the Lamb of God. The number of fish caught by Peter.
Exactly.
In the number tells us the name. The same way in Revelation, we'll know the Antichrist by the number of his name, 666. God has already endorsed what's called gematria, which is the value of letters. And so the number translated into a name is Ha-Pesach, the Passover. The number of fish equals a declaration that he is the Passover lamb. He revealed that when he was fishing. So if you don't grasp all this foundationally, you do that extremely well in this book. Well,
I try slip it in. I try and make it part of the background, so I'm not saying, so it doesn't seem like I'm lecturing. But
exactly.
I hope I did that, just as I'm sneaking in stuff, and so thank you for.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a paradigm shift, and I think that you have to take it in increments. I think that we have this incredible law of drift where we've drifted so far away from the truth that we're not going to get back there by spinning the wheel and doing a big U-turn. We're going to do it incrementally to get people's mindsets saying, wow, this has helped me realize that maybe I don't really know as much about Jesus as I thought I did. And I've never really seen him in this way. So I actually commend you for that.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Have you ever written up the whole language of Palm Sunday is wrong? I mean, somebody needs to do that.
I have a DVD.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. On the
I'd love that, because I'd love to show my students that.
I will send it to you.
Okay. Yeah, I need that.
What people don't realize and what they make a disconnect is Matthew 23, verses 37 through 39. As we look in Matthew 22, he's walking into the eastern gate, and people are greeting him, crying out in Hebrew, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But that evening, as he's leaving, he says to Jerusalem, you're not going to see me until you say that. Now, I've not ever met a person that said, well, did they just say that? When I read it, I said, didn't they just say that? Why do they have to say it again? They just said it. Because he wasn't talking to them. He was talking to those clowns that had rejected him a year and a half before, because God only speaks to the head. He judges the head. The nations are judged by the head, by the king. If the king is evil, the people are condemned. America, 8 years, the king was evil. We suffered under that. Israel suffered under that. So we have to look at the patterns of God. We have to know the true nature of God to see how he operates and how Jesus operated. He was dealing with the head. The people were fine. He loved the people. He talked to the people of every background. He did not have the issue with Samaritans. He didn't have the issue with mixed people. He didn't have an issue with Gentiles, the Roman guard, the centurion. He blessed the man. This was tantamount to a complete rebellion against the ruling authorities. It was so in their face that it caused them, but yet, Rabbi Nicodemus, one of them, comes to him, but at night, to say, hey, tell me, Rabbi, tell me. How do I do this? How do I get the kingdom of heaven? And he tells them, you have to be born again. This is such a Jewish concept. It's an old Bible Jewish concept. The mikvah, tevilah, going into the water, breaking through as if you were coming through your mother's womb another time, is so in the Old Testament. The ritual cleansing, the immersion, the bath, that he tells them, no, you can't go back into your mother's womb. But you can be baptized in the Spirit as if you were breaking through your mother's womb again. And it's so contextually rabbinical and Jewish in its foundation, because that's all there was. There was no Christian ritual. There was no church. It was just a bunch of Jewish guys and a bunch of Roman guys. And there were a lot of Egyptians there, because Rome had authority over all that region. So you could be a Roman and be an Egyptian. You could be a Roman and be a Turk. You could be a Roman and be a Somalian or an Ethiopian, because Rome had rule over all of that. We just don't realize the real context of, and you being a historian, see that you could be, Romans could look like anything in the region,
exactly.
because they were the empire. We're talking to Len Sweet. Fabulous conversation. We've got to do this again.
Yeah, this is so much fun, Eric.
We got to do this again. This isn't an interview. This is two friends just getting together, just enjoying a little historical, contextual Bible talk. But we do want you to encourage him and support him. I challenge you to read this book. It will challenge some of your thought process and have you look at Jesus. You might swallow a little hard when you look at the name, and you might take a deep breath, and somebody may see you reading and asking you the question, what are you reading there? Well, I'm reading about the bad habits of Jesus. What? This may not be the book that your pastor hands out to the entire congregation, but he should. But I highly recommend it, and I encourage you to really reassess what you know and be willing to confess you don't know and that you want to go down that road and explore. And Len Sweet, I thank you for being with us here.
Well, it means so much. Thank you. Coming from you, that you like that book, it means a lot to me. So thank you. God bless you, my friend. May the Lord bless all the works of your hand. As Moses was told in Numbers chapter 6 and verse 22, he said, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the children of Israel. He goes on to say, in this way I'll put my name on them and I will bless them. So let me bless you in the name of Jesus, Yeshua. Yivarech Adonai v'yismerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav v'kunecha. Yisa Adonai panav v'yasim shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his countenance toward you and give you his peace. In the name of the Prince of Peace, Jesus our Messiah. Amen and amen. We, in honor of the inauguration and out of respect for the office of the new president, we are cutting our broadcast day short today. We'll be back with you on Monday. We look forward to seeing you as we focus on prayer and God's steadfast strength in a time of difficulty. Until we see you on Monday, we wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a wonderful weekend. We'll see you Monday. Shalom.